Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to learn something about list slicing. So as the name signifies, list slicing is nothing but slicing our list into some parts. Now the main reason for learning list slicing is that if you have certain items in your list, and let's say that you don't want all the items in your list, but instead you only want a certain set of items from that list, then in that case you could go ahead and use the list slicing. So now let's learn how to actually slice up our lists. So the very first thing which we need to do is that we need to define a list. So let's define a list of numbers and let's put up some values over here. So let's say 0, 100, 200, 300, 400 and 500, and the final value is going to be, let's assume, 600. So let's say this is a simple list, and I've purposely taken this example to make you guys more understand in a better way. Now the next thing which you could do in order to slice list is that you simply need to first print out the sliced list, and then to this pass in numbers, which is the list. And instead of defining an index here, what we do is that we define the starting point and ending point of the list. So let's say if you define 2 and as the starting point, and let's say you need to define 5 as the ending point, then you could simply give a colon and type in 5. And if you save the code and if you try to run it, as you could see, you will get values from the second position. So this is essentially the 0th index position, this is the first index position, and this right here is nothing but the index position 2. So this is 3, this is 4, and this is 5. So you are going to get the values from the second position to the 4th position if you define a 5 here. So if you define a 6 here and save the code and run the code, you are going to get values from 2 to 5 in this case. So as you could notice, this thing right here is nothing but one slice from this list right here. So this is how list slicing works, and you could actually go ahead and slice up list in any manner. So you could also define this to as 4, and in this case you are going to get a different slice which is nothing but from 4 to 5. And one more interesting thing about list slicing is that you could also slice up the list in a certain way that you only have one side of the list. So let's say you want values in the list before the index 3. So you could simply type in colon and give out 3. So what this is going to do is that, actually I missed a square bracket here. So what this is going to do is that if you run the code, as you could see, you are going to get all the values or all the values in the list which are before the index position 3, which is nothing but 0, 100 and 200. So in this case you get a different slice of list. And also let's say that if you want values next to the index position 3, then what you could do is that you could simply change the side of the index. So instead of specifying the index to the right hand side of the colon, you could specify the index to the left hand side. So what this is going to do is that it is going to print out the 3 items, including the item which is specified, which is 300, which are present on the right hand side of the list. So that is how you actually get the right items of your list, by simply defining the midpoint. So if you define the midpoint to the left, it is actually going to give you the part of the list which is to the right hand side, and if you define this point on the left, it is going to give you the values on the left hand side of the list. After this, one more interesting operation with list is that you could specify intervals in your list. So let's say if you define list from, let's say, 1 to 6, and if you save the code, as you could see, you will get a slice from 100 to 500. Now in this case, what list actually does is that it jumps on to the next value, that is one value after another. Now you could also specify an interval to this list right here. That means instead of having a simple interval of 1, you could now have a defined interval. So if you define an interval of 2, and if you save the code and if you run it, as you could see, now it will actually skip 2 values. So after 100, instead of printing out 200, it is going to print out the value which is 300, and right after 300 it is going to leave out 400 and it is going to print 500. Now if you define the interval to be 3, let's save the code and run it, So in this case, it is going to skip 2 digits in between, that is 200 and 300, and it is directly going to print out the third value. So that's how you could perform list slices in Python. So essentially list slices are nothing but cutting out our list into into smaller parts, so that you could actually go ahead and manipulate those parts. So that's it for this lecture, and I hope you guys understood how to slice lists in different ways. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.